something that comes up all the time is to make a stretchy SplineIk, which actually isn't all that hard to do, but it's one of those things that's sort of tricky. It's an early thing you should learn how to rig to try and get an idea of like putting nodes together and stuff like that. So what I'm talking about is when you have a curve and you have joints along that curve. Those are a little hard to see, so let me select these and make them a visible color. Cool. So by default, if I grab this NCV on here and pull it, you know, my joints are not going to go stretching along there. But what I can do is add stretch to that. This I have done with a script, but I'll show you how to do it without a script. And now they're going to move along with that joint chain. Now, one of the things you're always going to have, because you're never going to have enough joints to match, you know, your amount of, whoops, something's weird there, but that's okay. It's not a big deal. Oh, it's because I had a curve inside a curve. Cool. One of the things you're always going to have is that you're never going to match unless you have a lot more joints on there. So you see how I have, what, that's 23 joints on there. I lost them again as far as color goes. Whoops. I'll bring those back real quick. You can see them. So see, that's a lot of joints to have along the curve. You know, if you're doing cables or something like that, that you need to use joints for, you know, gotta use a lot more joints along the curve. Otherwise, you'd use like a a different kind of deformer, like a wire deformer or something like that. That doesn't require joints, you know, in a rig that stays in Maya or something like that. Along that, you can also add, you know, go back to that curve real quick. Grab the NTV, you know, I call squash and stretch. So that way, when you squash and stretch it, it's kind of hard to see because this is such a long curve. But you can see it gets fatter when I bring it in. It gets thinner when I pull it out. You know, stuff like that. So I'm just going to go into the stretchy part for now. And then maybe, you know, eventually I'll do one that shows how to do, you know, squash and stretch as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is just create a curve. Well, actually, no. I'm going to create joints. There's something, okay. So if you've never created a SplineIk before, let's just say we're going to do a spine here. And generally, I do always build them straight. So we're just going to hold down Shift and make a bunch of joints here. Now, one of the things I like to do is to have all my joints be the same length. So it's not necessary, but it does make some calculations a little bit easier, and sometimes just works a little bit better. But it's not necessary. So one of the things about joints is that, you know, they're just translations from their parents. So this joint is 24 units from this joint, right? So if I make it 0, it's going to be in the exact same spot. If I make it 24, it's going to be there. Does that make sense? I hope so. I think my grid is not the correct size grid. I need to make a default version of my grid. Sorry about that. So I have my joint chain here. One of the things I want to do is I want to make sure that all the orientations are the same. So to do that, what I'm going to do is select all my joint chains. Let me just show you how I did this real quick. So I'm going to do a select hierarchy. Now that's something that I put into my hotbox because I use it so much. And then what I do is under display, I think it's under transform display, you have local rotation axes. So if I select all these guys and toggle that, I'm going to rip this off real quick. Okay, that hides them all. That shows them all, right? So you can see that this last one is incorrect. Well, it's not incorrect per se. It's just that if I want to go here and like rotate this, like this doesn't seem that weird, right? But if I make my selection the last joint and I do this rotation, let's do it on like say X. See how we're getting some really funky? That's not correct. So what I always like to do is make sure that that last joint in the chain matches the rotations of the other ones. Another thing you do is just avoid this last joint. Sometimes I'll do that too. I'll just say the last joint doesn't get to do anything, you know, leave it alone. But in this case, what I'll do is I'll fix the orientation. I'm going to go to skeleton orient joints. Open that up. I'm going to set it to none. And that should, make it world. World and none. There we go. So now I have it, so it's matching my orientations on these joints here. And I do want to look at, you don't necessarily have to do this, but okay, good. So I'm going to do the joint orient here. So if I undo that, there we go. So notice how the joint orient here is 0, 0, 0. If I go up 1, see how I have a negative 90 in there? If I do that, I'm going to get the same result, but I do like using the tools. Okay, so next thing I do is add a SplineIk. So there's a lot of different ways you can actually add a SplineIk. I'm going to show you two methods real quick. One is just the standard letting Maya do everything for you. So I'm going to go in here and reset this tool. You select the root and then the end effector of your joint chain. Again, I'm going to make these colors. You don't have this tool, but I do, just to show you. So now if I look at the curves here, you can see I have a basic system working the way I want it to work, right? Except for when I pull it, I'm not getting any sort of stretch, right? So that's what we're going to look at today. I'm not going to do a full spine rig. I'm just going to show you that. Now another way I wanted to show you about how to make a joint chain here, or a SplineIk. Let's go to a front view real quick. I'm going to go back to my joint tool. And actually, I'm just going to build a whole bunch of joints. I just want to show you this so that you have an idea of some of the things you can do. Okay, everything's in the right way. Actually, in this case, I'm going to name it. Let's name it spine joint. Just so we have something different name for the original. I can actually now go and just create a curve however I want, back to that front view. So let's say we create something stupid like that. And I can use that same tool, that's create spline tool, and I can tell it to not create the curve. So what that means now is I'm going to go in here and select this joint, select this joint. Now I didn't use any hotkeys, and then last click on the curve and see what happens. It actually is then going to go and just snap to that curve. Pretty cool, right? So you can actually, if you're in the node editor for the spline, I'm going to graph this really quick. You do have an input for that curve. So this is actually kind of cool. This is something that I use all the time for changing out curves. You can actually put some like a choice in there or something like that to swap these guys out. Oops, let's one that, to that, and to that. Cool. So it's world space, first array, into the end curve. So I can actually take this other curve, check this out, drop that in there, take this curve shape. I'm actually going to use the filter to find the world space, open that up so I can see that first array and watch what happens when I switch. So now it's using that curve instead. So that's kind of cool, right? Okay, just a little tidbit you should know. Now the next thing is, you notice that my joint chain doesn't go all the way to the end. That's because when I do the other option, it builds a curve for me that matches the length of the curve. When I do it this way, it's not doing that. So there's two ways I can make this guy match. So let me go in here and select all my joints. I'm not going to select the very first one. And watch what happens when I make them longer. Oops, I made them way too long. Oh, I want to just do it by pulling on the X. Yeah, okay. It's going to be the easier way to do it. No, it shouldn't be popping like that. Object, okay. Actually, can I slide in here? It's not letting me slide. Anyway, what I'm looking for is I can actually go in here and make this longer, almost like a stretch, to match the length of my joint chain, right? So that's sort of one way we can do it. I go back in here again. I'm going to bring these guys all the way back down to 10 again. That was their original length. Another way I can do it is with scale. This is very common as well. And I can hit, if I go in here and just scale this, for some reason it's working slightly better than the translate, but this is not, it doesn't really matter. And you can see that the scale, I can shrink it down and I can lengthen it, right? And then the curve will still control, like if I get near it, there we go, we'll still control that curve, or that joint chain, sorry. Make sense? Cool. So what we're gonna do on this original one here, actually first what we're gonna do is select all the CVs and let's create some clusters. So incidentally, if you grab a curve, CVs, and then hold down Control, whoops, go back to here. Whoop, no, we do not want a new CV. And curves, hit F8. I can actually use this marking menu here to cluster everything. So now these guys all have clusters on them. I'm going to go a step further and actually under display, turn on my selection handles. And what's great about selection handles is up here, this is actually your hierarchy of selection. So now if I just do a swipe, I'm going to get those guys. I'm going to hide the IK handle because I don't want to get that by mistake. But now I can actually grab these guys. And because it's a cluster, I can actually go ahead and zero that out. And it'll go back to its original position. All right, makes sense so far? I hope so. All right, so I'm going to open up the node editor. Sorry, I have hotkeys for that, but I'll do it the correct way. And what I want to do is I want to create something that tells me the length of the curve, this guy here. So I'm going to drag and drop that in here. Don't worry about the ridge node. That's the one that was created when you created the deformer. And one of the easiest ways to do this is actually with a script. I know that, or a command, sorry, let's call it a command. I know that sounds scary, but it's not. So the command is, oh, come here. I'm going to do this in Mel. You can do it in Python as well, but you don't really need to. Arc, len, and so -ch is for history. And I spelled it wrong because there's not a capital L. There we go. Cool. So what that command does is creates a curve info node. So the curve info node, again, just like what was going into our original, check this out. So our curve shape is using world space 0 to tell it what curve to use on the AK handle. Similarly, the curve info uses that same channel output or attribute to tell it what curve it's looking at. Now right now, if I look over here in the curve info node, I can see that I have a arc length of 96, which basically just all that means is that my current curve is 96 units long. If I grab one of these clusters and I drag it, you see how I get a longer arc length, right? If I bring it back up, I get a shorter arc length. So what I want to do is figure out a way that I can compare that to what I'm going to call my default length, which is 96. Yeah, 96. So the easiest way to do that is with a multiply divide. So I'm going to hit tab, type in multiply, or mult, and I'm going to find multiply divide. Open that up, open this up, and what I want to do is take that arc length and put it into input 2, like that. So we see that it's 96. I'm going to take that value, copy and paste it into the top there, and then I'm going to put it into divide. So what's 96 divided by 96? That's correct, 1. So the really, easiest way to do this is if I take these these joints here, I'm going to bring those in as well. I can actually put that into the scale, what was that, X of the joint chain. So let's try that. So let's take these guys over like this. Now I would script this, or actually I have tools that'll help me do this, but I'm going to do it by hand for this demo. So scale, 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 and I'm going to take the output X into scale X, output X, scale X, output X, scale X, output X, scale X. Correct, cool. All right, so far nothing's happened, but if I grab that N cluster, I got it backwards. Not a big deal, but check out. So you see what's happening. It's actually shrinking rather than lengthening. So I'm going to go back to that node editor. So I got my multiply divide backwards. So arc length into the top one, cut this, and make this 96. There we go. Cool. So if I zero that out, my joint chain should all be at a value of 1, which they are. If I drag this out, it's going to pull it out. And it's never going to be exact. So often what I'll do is I'll just ignore this last joint. And this will be the one that I bind to. And this one up here will just be the just one that hangs out. It doesn't do anything. But you can see that if you have more joints, it's going to work a little bit better along there. So I'm going to take these two guys, group them together, and maybe put their pivot like right there. Now I have, oh, I also need to make sure that the clusters are set to relative. If I'm using clusters, I usually use joints. I like using joints, a little bit easier. Cluster 3, cluster attributes, relative off. Cluster 4, relative off. So I can grab this and I can have a little joints moving around, something like that. Or I can move to the end, pivot there, and I can move my joint chain around like that. Ooh, what did I just do? There we go. All right. So it's not all that exciting, but it at least gives you an idea of how to drive the stretchiness, or in this case, we're using the scale. I've said other videos where I don't like using scale because you can get a negative inverse effect. But for something like spine, stuff like that, it's usually just fine. So let me think. Do I want to show you the other way or the additional way? Sure, why not? We'll go back to that node editor. I'm going to go back to my first tab here, and let's do this. So what I'm going to do this time, cut all those, is I want to tag into the length of the joint, right? So I know that it's 10. There we go. So what we're going to do for each of these, I'm going to do a multiply divide times 10, and that should give me the same result. But in this case, I'm using mult double linear. The only reason I'm using this is because it's a little bit lighter. It doesn't really make a difference. But it's just also for example, so you know that it exists. So I'll put x into the input 2. So 10 times 1 is what? It's 10. So if I output this, I should see no change in my joint, but I got to change my joint. It's still 10. Was I not at 10? Oh, maybe I have the wrong value. Oh, sorry, 24. Wait, are all my joints, my clusters at 0? Yeah, I guess it was always 24. I just didn't really pay attention. All right, so I put that in there. I see no change. There we go. That's better. Now I could just use this one to go to each because they're the exact same length, or I could make, a duplicate for each. The reason I'm showing the duplicate for each is because if you happen to have joints that didn't have the same length, then you could do that. But the same, I could just use the same one. Come on. Like in this case, I'll take it and just do this. Come on, there we go. They're all 10. They're all the exact same length, so it doesn't really matter. So hopefully, if I did that right, I get the same response. And actually, this is kind of interesting. It actually looks like it works just a little bit better in matching that joint length, right? So yeah, I guess I'm going to say use translate. It still won't be perfect. So you see it will come off. Like if I grab here and pull this, it's going to push past it, which is not desirable. So again, I'll just use this joint as my bind joint, and this joint will just be a null joint that doesn't do anything. But I should get the same response here. If I move that pivot, whoops, go up one and move that pivot to, let's say, like here. So let's say that's our chest. We can move that around however we want. Right? And the last thing I'm going to do is just show you how to manage this to turn it on and off. So there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. I think in this case I'll use, what do I want to use here? I don't want to use a chooser. What do I want to use? What's the word I'm thinking of? Condition. There we go. So what we can do, and we can actually do some other things with this, which is kind of fun. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is take, let's take the multiply divide and hijack that. Yeah, okay, we'll do that. So I'm going to cheat really quickly because I'm lazy and throw this into my multiple connect window here. It's a script that I have, but I know I said I wouldn't use any scripts, but I got lazy. Actually, you know what? I'll just do it this way. I'll do it by hand. Sorry. Let's just use this one node to go to all of them. So I'll put translate X, bring this one down, output, and translate X. Cool. Take these guys, get rid of them, don't need them anymore. Bring this up here. And what I'm going to do is take this output X and put it into my, let's say, color if true. Really doesn't matter. And we'll put that into the output R, into the second channel. And then we need to come up with something. So we'll say second term is this. Let's grab, I don't know, the first joint and give it a channel, just so we have something. Modify, add attribute. There we go. And we'll call it stretch. 0, 1, 0. I will default on. I don't care. Let's add that in. All right. So what I'm going to do is take that stretch attribute and throw it into the first term. There we go. Cool. And we'll say if they are equal, which is true, you're going to use the multiply divide. If it's false, it'll just be 1. See how that works? So let's see if that actually worked the way I expected it to. I'll grab that last curve, pull it out like this. I'm going to grab that first joint, and we'll turn stretch off. And look at that. It goes back to where it was. Right? So we could say stretch on, stretch off. Right? If we wanted to maybe give a stretch like a control, we can grab that joint again, or whatever our controller is. I'm going to add another attribute. We'll call this one, I should have called it auto stretch. Let's do that. Oh wait, nope. Yeah, okay. Sure, whatever. We'll take the auto stretch and replace the first term. So let me just make sure that that worked. Auto stretch off, on, cool. And we'll go back to that, and I'm going to say the stretch is going to go to if color is false. Is that correct? Yeah, color of false. R, there we go. You can drag these back and forth either way. They do the same thing. So what I am going to do too is go and edit this stretch factor. So let's go back to our modify, edit attribute, go to stretch, and we'll go to say like 10. Okay, so now what should happen is if I turn stretch off, it sets it to this value here, which is 0. So let's put a 1 in there. So that should get us back to our 24, which it does. But I actually can go in here now under my stretch factor, and I can give it whatever values I want if I wanted to stretch it and grow it along that curve for some other reason. All right, so I think that's enough exploring of all that. I'm going to leave it at that, and hope this has been helpful.